My name is Roland Farrow, and I've spent 25 years perfecting the art of being invisible in my own house. You'd think that would make me an expert at spotting when someone else starts treating you like furniture, but apparently, I'm a slow learner. The revelation came on a Tuesday night in my auto body shop, grease under my fingernails and the smell of motor oil thick in the air. I was finishing up a brake job on Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick when I heard Giselle's voice drifting through the thin wall that separated my office from the main garage floor. "He says he'll make me his queen," she was saying, her voice pitched low, but carrying that breathless quality I hadn't heard in years. "All I have to do is show up and be interesting." I froze, wrench halfway to the brake line. Queen? The only throne Giselle had ever shown interest in was the leather recliner in our living room, and even then she complained it wasn't comfortable enough. "Boring," she continued, and I could practically see her rolling her eyes. 25 years of boring, same conversations, same routines, same everything. Roland thinks excitement is when the Browns actually win a game. I guess being boring is my superpower. Too bad it doesn't come with a cape or the ability to fly away from conversations that make your stomach feel like you've swallowed broken glass. Our town, Millbrook, sits about 40 minutes east of Cleveland, close enough to Lake Erie that you can smell the water on humid days. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, where the biggest excitement usually involves someone's teenager getting caught drinking behind the old steel mill. The mill closed down 15 years ago, leaving behind a skeleton of rusted metal and broken windows that the city council keeps promising to demolish, but never quite gets around to. Giselle and I met here when we were both 23, young and stupid enough to think that love could overcome the slow suffocation of small-town life. She was working at the bank then, all sharp suits and sharper ambition. I was already running the shop, having inherited it from my father, along with his debts and his reputation for honest work. We got married in the little church on Maple Street, honeymooned in Niagara Falls, and settled into what I thought was a good life. 2 kids, both grown now and living in cities with actual opportunities. A modest house on Elm Street with a yard big enough for a garden that Giselle abandoned after the first summer. A business that kept us fed and housed, if not wealthy. Apparently, I was the only one who thought it was good. I waited until her voice faded, then crept closer to the office door. The conversation had ended, but I could hear her moving around, gathering her things. She'd taken to spending her evenings at the shop lately, claiming she wanted to help with the books. Now I wondered what she'd really been doing. The office was small and cramped, dominated by a metal desk that had seen better decades and filing cabinets that groaned when you opened them. Giselle's purse sat on the desk, along with her phone and a small stack of receipts I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I picked up the receipts. La Bella Vita Spa, $240 for something called a rejuvenation package. Nordstrom, $418 for a dress that cost more than I usually spent on clothes in a year. Chez Laurent, the fancy French place downtown that I'd suggested for our anniversary 3 years running, only to be told it was too expensive. The phone was locked, of course, but Giselle had never been particularly creative with passwords. I tried her birthday, then mine, then our anniversary. Nothing. Then I remembered something she'd said months ago about updating her security, making everything more sophisticated. On a whim, I tried Queen 123. The phone unlocked. I felt like a criminal scrolling through her messages, but the feeling didn't stop me. Most of the recent texts were from someone listed only as C in her contacts. The messages made my stomach clench tighter with each word. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear the blue dress. You deserve so much more than what you have. He doesn't appreciate what a treasure you are." The blue dress. I'd seen it hanging in our closet, tags still attached, and assumed she was saving it for something special. Apparently, I wasn't special enough. I scrolled further back, finding weeks of messages that painted a picture I'd been too blind to see. Lunch dates, shopping trips, long conversations about dreams and desires and disappointments, all with someone who signed his messages, "Your devoted Cornelius." Cornelius, I knew that name. Cornelius Whitmore owned the biggest house in Millbrook, a sprawling mansion on the hill overlooking the lake. Old money, inherited from a grandfather who'd made his fortune in steel back when the mills were booming. He'd been married once, decades ago, but his wife passed away from cancer when they were both still relatively young. No children, no close family that anyone knew about. He was also 70 years old if he was a day. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a well-tuned engine. The spa visits, the expensive clothes, the sudden interest in charity work that kept her busy 3 afternoons a week, the way she'd started talking about wasted potential and missed opportunities. Giselle wasn't having a midlife crisis. She was having an audition. I heard her heels clicking across the garage floor, heading back toward the office. Quickly, I locked the phone and placed it back where I'd found it, shoving the receipts into my pocket. By the time she appeared in the doorway, I was bent over Mrs. Henderson's engine, trying to look like I'd been working the whole time. "Almost finished?" she asked, her voice bright and casual, the same voice that had been discussing my boring inadequacies 5 minutes earlier. "Just about," I managed. "You ready to head home?" She glanced at her watch, a new one I didn't recognize. Gold band, expensive looking. "Actually, I think I'll stay a bit longer. Marissa wants to meet for coffee, and you know how she likes to talk." Marissa Chen had been Giselle's best friend since high school. They'd maintained their friendship through marriages and divorces, kids and career changes, supporting each other through every crisis and celebration. If anyone would know about Giselle's new relationship, it would be Marissa. "Tell her I said hello," I said. Giselle smiled, the same smile she'd given me on our wedding day. "I will. Don't wait up." After she left, I sat in the quiet garage and tried to process what I'd learned. 25 years of marriage, and my wife was ready to trade me in for an older model with a bigger bank account. The rational part of my brain whispered that I should confront her, demand an explanation, maybe suggest counseling. The rational part of my brain could go to heck. I pulled out my own phone and did what any self-respecting husband in the digital age would do. I started researching. Cornelius Whitmore had a surprisingly robust online presence for a 70-year-old. Social media accounts, charity board memberships, and a local newspaper feature from last year about his restoration of the historic Whitmore Mansion. The article included several photos of the house, both exterior and interior shots, that showcased rooms the size of my entire first floor. Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings that probably cost more than my annual income. There was also a photo of Cornelius himself, silver-haired and distinguished in an expensive suit, standing next to a vintage Rolls-Royce in his circular driveway. He looked exactly like what he was, a man with enough money to make problems disappear and dreams come true. At least, that's what Giselle was betting on. I was still scrolling through search results when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You deserve better. Watch The Country Club tomorrow night." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words sank in. Someone else knew about Giselle and Cornelius. Someone who thought I should know about it too. The Country Club. Of course. Where else would a woman auditioning to be queen take her potential king for a public debut? I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "A friend." Then nothing. No matter how many times I texted back, the mysterious friend had gone silent. I locked up the shop and drove home through streets I'd traveled thousands of times, past houses where I knew every family's story, every triumph and tragedy that had played out behind those familiar windows. Millbrook was the kind of place where secrets were currency and gossip was the local sport, but somehow I'd missed the biggest story of all, my own wife's betrayal. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, Giselle's car nowhere to be seen. Inside, Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Her coffee cup in the sink, the newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle she never quite finished, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter next to a romance novel with a shirtless man on the cover. But now, I saw it all differently. The coffee cup wasn't domestic routine, it was evidence of her impatience to leave. The unfinished crossword wasn't a sign of a busy life, it was proof that her attention was elsewhere. Even the romance novel seemed like research for the fantasy she was trying to make real. I walked through our house like a detective examining a crime scene, looking for clues I'd missed. In the bedroom, I found the blue dress hanging in the closet, tags removed now, ready for its debut. In the bathroom, expensive cosmetics I'd never seen before lined the counter next to her usual drugstore brands. On her nightstand, tucked beneath a stack of magazines, I found a small leather journal. My hands shook as I opened it. Giselle had never been much of a writer, but the pages were filled with her careful handwriting, documenting what looked like a courtship in reverse. Instead of a young woman falling in love, these were the calculated observations of someone studying for a role. C prefers classical music. Must remember to mention my appreciation for Mozart. C's late wife was involved in the Arts Council. Volunteer opportunity? C mentioned his fondness for French cuisine, research wines. Page after page of notes, strategies, and observations. My wife had turned falling in love into a business plan, complete with target demographics and market research. The final entry was dated just 3 days ago. C says he's tired of being alone, tired of staff who only care about their paychecks. He wants someone who understands quality, who appreciates the finer things. Someone who won't take him for granted the way R takes me for granted. Soon. R. Roland. Me. I closed the journal and put it back exactly where I'd found it, then walked to the kitchen and poured myself 3 fingers of the bourbon I usually saved for special occasions. This felt special enough. As I sat at the kitchen table, sipping whiskey and staring at the receipts I'd taken from Giselle's purse, a plan began to form in my mind. Not a good plan necessarily, but a satisfying one. If Giselle wanted to play games, I could play too. If she thought boring old Roland was too predictable to fight back, she was about to learn how wrong she could be. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. You'll want to see this. I typed back, I'll be there. This time there was no response, but there didn't need to be. Whatever game was being played, I was officially a participant now. I finished my bourbon and went to bed in the house that no longer felt like home, listening for the sound of Giselle's car in the driveway. She came home after midnight, moving quietly through the house like she was trying not to wake me. I pretended to sleep, but my mind was wide awake, planning and plotting and preparing for whatever came next. Boring Roland Farrow was about to become very interesting indeed. The last thing I remember thinking before I finally drifted off was that Giselle had been right about one thing. Our life was about to become a lot less predictable. The next morning, Giselle was already gone when I woke up. No note, no explanation, just the lingering scent of that expensive perfume she'd started wearing and a coffee cup in the sink with lipstick stains darker than any shade she'd worn in years. I called the shop and told Jimmy, my part-time mechanic, that I'd be in late. At 62, Jimmy had worked on more cars than most people had owned, and he could handle anything that came through the door without me hovering over his shoulder. Instead of heading to work, I drove to Mac's boxing gym on the south side of town. The gym occupied the ground floor of what used to be a furniture warehouse, all exposed brick and high ceilings, with heavy bags hanging from steel beams like leather fruit. Mac himself was a mountain of a man in his 60s, with hands like sledgehammers and a face that looked like it had taken more punches than it probably should have. He'd been trying to teach me to box for the better part of 2 years, with limited success. I had decent form, but lacked what he called the instinct to finish a fight. Maybe that was about to change. "You look like someone pissed in your cornflakes," Mac said when I walked through the door. He was wrapping his hands, preparing for his morning routine with the heavy bag. Something like that. I told him about Giselle and Cornelius, about the receipts and the text messages, and the mysterious friend who wanted me to watch the country club tonight. Mac listened without interrupting, occasionally grunting or shaking his head. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was looking for something specific. "You want my advice?" he finally asked. "That's why I'm here. Don't get mad, get even, and don't get caught." "That's it? That's your wisdom?" Mac shrugged his massive shoulders. "Anger makes you stupid. Revenge makes you creative. The trick is staying smart long enough to pull it off." He handed me a pair of gloves. "Besides, you need to hit something before you do something you'll regret. Might as well be the bag instead of Cornelius's face." I spent the next hour beating the hell out of Mac's heavy bag, working out 25 years of accumulated frustrations. Every punch was a conversation I'd avoided. Every combination was a compromise I'd made. Every round was a year of taking the path of least resistance. By the time I was finished, my hands ached and my shirt was soaked with sweat, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. "Feel better?" Mac asked. "Getting there." "Good. Now go home, shower, and put on your best shirt. If you're going to crash their party tonight, you might as well look good doing it." The country club sat on 50 acres of manicured lawn overlooking the lake, all rolling greens and pristine gardens that required a small army of groundskeepers to maintain. I'd been inside exactly once, for a charity auction that Giselle had insisted we attend 3 years ago. The evening had cost us $400 for dinner and a silent auction bid on a weekend getaway we never took. Tonight, I had no invitation and no legitimate reason to be there. What I did have was a friend. Tommy Rodriguez worked for the catering company that handled most of the club's events. We'd gone to high school together, played on the same baseball team, and maintained the kind of casual friendship that involved Christmas cards and occasional beers when we ran into each other around town. One phone call was all it took. "You want a what?" Tommy asked when I explained what I needed. "Just get me inside. I'll handle the rest." "Roland, this is crazy. If they catch you, they won't. I just need to see something for myself." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then, "You bring your own apron and keep your mouth shut, and you owe me a case of beer." Deal. The service entrance to the country club was hidden behind a screen of evergreen trees, designed to keep the help invisible from the members' view. Tommy met me there at 6:30, handing me a white apron and a tray of champagne glasses. "Private dining room," he said. 20 guests, cocktail reception followed by dinner. You clear glasses, refill drinks, and pretend you don't speak English if anyone asks you a direct question." "Got it. And Roland, whatever you're planning, don't do it here. I need this job." I promised him I'd behave, but we both knew I was lying. The private dining room was everything I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of long-gone robber barons, and windows that offered a perfect view of the lake. The guests were the usual collection of Millbrook's elite, the kind of people who measured success in square footage and stock portfolios. And there, holding court near the windows, were Giselle and Cornelius. She looked stunning. The blue dress fit her perfectly, and she'd done something different with her hair that made her look 10 years younger. She was laughing at something Cornelius had said, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that was intimate without being obvious. Cornelius himself was smaller than I'd expected, barely taller than Giselle even in her heels. But he carried himself with the confidence that comes from never having to check your bank balance, never having to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. I moved through the room like a ghost, clearing glasses and refilling drinks while I watched my wife perform the role of her life. She was charming without being flirtatious, interested without being desperate, sophisticated without being pretentious. She was everything I'd fallen in love with 25 years ago, turned up to 11 and directed at someone else. "Champagne?" I offered, approaching their little circle with a tray of fresh glasses. Giselle glanced at me without recognition, her attention already returning to Cornelius before I'd even finished speaking. 25 years of marriage, and I was invisible enough to serve her drinks at her own affair. "Thank you," Cornelius said, taking a glass. His voice was cultured, with just a hint of an accent that suggested expensive education and European vacations. "Excellent service tonight." "Just doing my job," I replied. That's when Giselle looked at me again, really looked this time. I saw the moment of recognition in her eyes, followed immediately by panic and confusion. Her face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Roland," she whispered. "Evening, honey," I said, loud enough for Cornelius and the 3 other people in their conversation circle to hear. "Funny running into you here." The silence that followed was the kind that seems to suck all the oxygen out of a room. Cornelius looked from me to Giselle and back again, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding, to something that might have been amusement. "I take it you two know each other," he said. "You could say that," I replied. "We're married." Giselle's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet, and I could feel every eye in the room turning toward us. "Roland, what are you doing here?" Giselle hissed. "Working," I said, gesturing to my apron. "Someone's got to pay for those spa treatments." Cornelius stepped forward, and I could see him trying to process the situation. To his credit, he didn't look embarrassed or guilty. If anything, he seemed curious about how this particular drama was going to play out. "Mr. Farrow, I presume," he said, extending his hand. "Cornelius Whitmore. I believe we have some things to discuss." I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then deliberately adjusted my grip on the champagne tray. The movement was small, barely noticeable, but it sent a clear message. I wasn't here to shake hands and play nice. "I'm sure we do," I said, "but not here. Not tonight." I turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Giselle. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fear and fury. "Enjoy your dinner," I told her. "Try the salmon. I hear it's fresh." I walked out of the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, leaving behind a silence that felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Tommy was waiting in the kitchen, his face pale with worry. "Please tell me you didn't just do what I think you did," he said. "Depends what you think I did." "Started a war." I untied my apron and handed it back to him. "The war started weeks ago. I just showed up for the first battle." My phone was buzzing when I got back to my truck. 3 missed calls from Giselle and a text message from my mysterious friend. Well played. But this is just the beginning. I drove home through empty streets, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. The confrontation at the country club had been satisfying, but it was also a declaration of war. Giselle would be furious, Cornelius would be curious, and the gossip mill would be working overtime by morning. Good. Let them talk. Let them wonder what boring old Roland Farrow was planning next. The house was still empty when I got home, but I didn't expect it to be otherwise. Giselle would spend the night doing damage control, trying to explain away her husband's dramatic appearance at what was supposed to be her grand debut. I poured myself another bourbon and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. If I was going to war, I needed intelligence. And thanks to the wonders of modern technology, intelligence was easier to gather than ever before. Cornelius Whitmore had lived his entire life in the public eye, at least by Millbrook standards. Charity boards, social events, business dealings, it was all documented somewhere online. I started with the local newspaper's archives and worked my way through decades of society pages and business reports. What I found was a man who had inherited his wealth and spent his life managing it carefully. Conservative investments, charitable giving, and a lifestyle that was comfortable without being ostentatious. At least, that's how it looked on paper. But there were gaps in the story, periods where Cornelius seemed to disappear from public view for months at a time. The most recent gap had lasted nearly 2 years, from late 2019 until just a few months ago. I was still researching when I heard Giselle's car in the driveway. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and she was moving more quietly than usual, probably hoping I'd be asleep. I stayed in the kitchen, waiting. She came through the front door like she was defusing a bomb, every step careful and calculated. When she saw me sitting at the table, she froze. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we?" She sat down across from me, and I could see that she'd been crying. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair had lost its perfect styling. She looked older, more fragile than she had in the blue dress. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." I studied her face, looking for some sign of the woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved for 25 years. She was still there, buried beneath the guilt and the fear and the desperate ambition, but she felt like a stranger. "Long enough?" I said finally. "Roland, I can explain." Can you explain why you've been lying to me for months? Can you explain why you've been spending money we don't have on clothes and treatments and dinners with another man? Can you explain why you think I'm so boring that I deserve to be replaced by someone old enough to be your father? She flinched at each question like I was hitting her. Maybe I was. "It's not about replacing you," she said quietly. "It's about having more, being more. We've been stuck in the same routine for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be excited about anything." "So you decided to get excited about someone else?" "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Giselle? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been auditioning to be wife number 2 to a man with more money than sense." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the table. When she looked up, there were fresh tears in her eyes. "Maybe that's exactly what I've been doing," she said, "and maybe that makes me a terrible person. But Roland, when was the last time you looked at me the way Cornelius does? When was the last time you made me feel like I was worth fighting for?" The question hit harder than I'd expected, because the truth was, I couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped seeing each other and started going through the motions. But that didn't excuse what she'd done, and it didn't change what I was planning to do about it. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "I honestly don't know." She went upstairs after that, leaving me alone with my laptop and my bourbon and my plans for revenge. I heard the shower running, then the sound of her moving around the bedroom, probably packing. By morning, she was gone. I woke up to an empty house and a note on the kitchen counter written in Giselle's careful handwriting. "Roland, I'm staying at Marissa's for a few days while we figure this out. I think we both need space to think about what we want. I'll call you soon. G." Space to think. Right. More like space to plan her next move with Cornelius without having to worry about her inconvenient husband showing up at the wrong moment. I called the shop and told Jimmy I'd be in after lunch, then drove to Sammy's Tavern on the east side of town. Sammy's was the kind of place where secrets went to get drunk and spill themselves all over the bar, and if anyone knew what the town was saying about last night's drama at the country club, it would be Sammy himself. The tavern occupied the ground floor of a building that had been a hardware store in the 1950s, a head shop in the 1970s, and a series of failed restaurants in the decades since. Sammy had bought it 5 years ago and turned it into exactly what Millbrook needed, a place where working people could drink cheap beer and complain about their lives without judgment. Sammy Torres was 43 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and possessed of an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's business. He'd grown up 3 streets over from me, and we'd maintained the kind of friendship that involved Christmas cards and occasional favors when one of us needed something. Today, I needed information. Well, Sammy said when I walked through the door. if it isn't the man of the hour. The bar was mostly empty at 11 in the morning, just a couple of retirees nursing coffee and reading newspapers. But I could see from Sammy's expression that the story had already made the rounds. That bad? I asked. Depends on your perspective. From where I'm sitting, it's the most entertainment this town's had since Mayor Patterson got caught with his secretary in the City Hall supply closet. I ordered a beer and settled onto a bar stool. What are people saying? What aren't they saying? Mrs. Callahan was in here first thing this morning, practically vibrating with excitement. According to her, you showed up at the country club dressed as a waiter and confronted your wife in front of half the town's elite. Mrs. Callahan lived 2 houses down from us and had elevated neighborhood gossip to an art form. If she was talking, everyone would know by sunset. That's not exactly what happened, I said. Doesn't matter. Truth is just the starting point for a good story. By the time it makes the rounds, you'll have either challenged Cornelius to a duel or burned down the country club. Maybe both. Sammy polished a glass while he talked, his movements automatic after years of practice. The real question is, what are you planning to do next? I'm not sure yet. Well, you better figure it out fast, because according to Mrs. Callahan, Giselle moved into the Whitmore mansion this morning. The beer turned to acid in my mouth. She what? Big moving truck, 3 guys carrying boxes and furniture. Cornelius himself supervised the whole thing from his front porch, apparently. Mrs. Callahan's cousin lives on Hill Street, has a perfect view of the whole estate. I set my beer down carefully, afraid I might throw it against the wall if I held on to it much longer. Giselle hadn't just left me. She'd moved in with her replacement husband before the ink was dry on our separation. There's more, Sammy continued. Word is, Cornelius has been having some health problems. Nothing serious, but enough to make him think about his legacy. Mortality has a way of making old men do stupid things. Like marrying gold diggers. Like thinking they can buy love with expensive gifts and promises of inheritance. Sammy leaned across the bar, lowering his voice even though we were practically alone. Roland, I've been watching people make mistakes in this bar for 5 years. The ones who plan their revenge while they're angry always regret it later. The ones who wait, who think it through, who get creative, those are the ones who get satisfaction. You sound like Mac. Mac's a smart man. You should listen to him. I finished my beer and left Sammy a $20 tip, then drove across town to Hill Street. I told myself I was just curious, that I needed to see the situation for myself before I decided what to do next. But the truth was, I needed to see where my wife had gone to replace me. The Whitmore mansion sat behind iron gates at the end of a circular driveway, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and enough security cameras to film a movie. It was everything our modest house on Elm Street wasn't: grand, imposing, and expensive enough to solve every financial worry Giselle had ever expressed. I could see why she'd been tempted. As I sat in my truck across the street, pretending to check my phone, I saw movement in one of the upstairs windows. A figure in blue, the same blue dress from last night, appeared briefly before disappearing again. Giselle was already making herself at home. My phone buzzed with a text from the mysterious number that had been feeding me information. She's moving fast. You need to move faster. I typed back, Who are you? Someone who knows what it's like to be replaced. Before I could respond, another message appeared. Check your email. I opened my email app and found a new message from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, just an attachment. A video file. The video was clearly shot through a window, probably from one of the houses across the street. It showed Giselle and Cornelius in what looked like a library or study, sitting close together on a leather sofa. The audio was muffled, but I could make out enough of their conversation to understand what they were discussing. Boring doesn't begin to cover it, Giselle was saying. 25 years of the same conversations, the same routines, the same complete lack of ambition. Roland thinks success is getting through the day without anything changing. Cornelius nodded sympathetically. You deserve so much more, my dear. A woman of your intelligence and beauty shouldn't be wasted on someone who can't appreciate what he has. I know that now. I just wish I'd realized it sooner. Well, you're here now. That's what matters. The video ended there, but it was enough. More than enough. I sat in my truck for a long time after watching it, staring at the mansion where my wife was busy building a new life with someone else's money. The rational part of my brain whispered that I should be hurt, that I should be focused on salvaging what was left of our marriage. But the rational part of my brain had been overruled by something darker and more determined. If Giselle wanted to play games with rich old men, I could play too, and I had advantages she didn't know about. I drove back to the shop and spent the afternoon working on Mrs. Henderson's Buick, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of mechanical repair. But my mind kept wandering to the mansion on Hill Street and the woman in the blue dress who used to be my wife. Jimmy noticed my distraction. You okay, boss? You've been staring at that brake line for 10 minutes? Just thinking. About Giselle? News traveled fast in a town like Millbrook. Jimmy had probably heard the whole story from 3 different sources before lunch. Among other things. Jimmy was quiet for a moment then. My ex-wife left me for a guy with a bigger house and a fancier car, took half of everything I owned and most of my self-respect. What did you do? Got drunk for about 6 months, then got smart. Started focusing on my own life instead of hers. Best thing that ever happened to me, looking back. You think I should just let it go? Jimmy shrugged. I think you should do whatever helps you sleep at night. But Roland, don't do anything that's going to land you in jail or make you into someone you don't recognize. Good advice. I just wasn't sure I was ready to take it. That evening, I drove to my sister Lila's house on the other side of town. Lila was 3 years older than me, twice divorced, and possessed of the kind of sharp tongue that could cut glass. She'd never particularly liked Giselle, claiming she was too ambitious for her own good. Turned out she'd been right. I heard, Lila said when she opened the door. The whole town's heard. Come in before the neighbors start taking pictures. Lila's house was small but comfortable, filled with books and plants and the kind of eclectic furniture that suggested someone who valued character over coordination. She poured us both coffee and settled into her favorite armchair. So, she said, what's the plan? What makes you think I have a plan? Because you're here instead of home feeling sorry for yourself, and because you have that look. What look? The same look you had when Tommy Martinez stole your girlfriend in high school, right before you convinced his mother that he was the one who'd been toilet papering her garden. I'd forgotten about that. Tommy had spent 3 weeks grounded while I took Jennifer Morrison to the homecoming dance. This is a little more complicated than high school revenge, I said. Is it? Giselle wants to trade up to a richer husband. Cornelius wants a pretty young wife to make him feel vital again. It's the oldest story in the book. So what do you suggest? Lila smiled, and I recognized the expression. It was the same look she'd had when she'd helped me plan Tommy Martinez's downfall 30 years ago. I suggest we remind them both that every fairy tale has a dragon, she said, and sometimes the dragon wins. We talked for 2 hours, working through possibilities and strategies. Lila had always been the planner in our family, the one who thought 3 moves ahead while the rest of us were still figuring out the rules. By the time I left her house, I had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't a good plan necessarily, but it was better than sitting around feeling sorry for myself. And it was definitely going to be more interesting than anything boring old Roland Farrow had ever done before. My phone buzzed as I was driving home. Another message from my mysterious ally. Tomorrow night, Whitmore's having a dinner party. Small group, very exclusive. You might want to see who's on the guest list. An attachment followed, a photo of an elegant invitation with Cornelius's monogram at the top. The guest list included the mayor, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and several other prominent citizens. And at the bottom, in elegant script, Mr. and Mrs. Cornelius Whitmore request the pleasure of your company. Mrs. Cornelius Whitmore. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. I typed back, "How are you getting this information? Does it matter? The question is, what are you going to do with it?" I stared at the invitation for a long time, thinking about Giselle in her blue dress, playing the role of the gracious hostess for Millbrook's elite, thinking about Cornelius, so confident in his ability to buy whatever he wanted. They were both about to learn that some things couldn't be purchased, and some people couldn't be replaced without consequences. The next morning brought rain and the kind of gray sky that made everything in Millbrook look like a faded photograph. I was in the shop early, trying to lose myself in the familiar routine of oil changes and brake repairs, when Marissa Chen walked through the door. Marissa looked nervous, which was unusual for her. In all the years I'd known her, she'd always carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never met a problem she couldn't talk her way through. Today, she seemed smaller somehow, less certain. "Roland," she said, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a shop rag and gestured toward the office. "About what?" "About Giselle. About what she's doing." We sat across from each other at the metal desk where I'd first discovered my wife's receipts and secret phone messages. Marissa fidgeted with her purse strap, avoiding my eyes. "She's making a mistake," Marissa said finally. "A big one." "You think?" "Cornelius isn't what he seems, Roland. There are things about him, about his situation, that Giselle doesn't understand." "Such as?" Marissa was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He's not as wealthy as everyone thinks. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, it's all leveraged. He's been living on credit and investment income for years, but the investments haven't been performing well." This was news to me. "How do you know this?" "Because I work at the bank, Roland. I've seen his statements. Cornelius Whitmore is rich on paper, but his actual liquid assets are much smaller than his reputation suggests." I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. "Does Giselle know?" "I don't think so, and I don't think Cornelius is going to tell her until after they're married." "Married?" Marissa nodded miserably. "He proposed last night, at the dinner party, in front of everyone." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known this was coming, had seen it building for weeks, but hearing it confirmed still felt like being punched in the stomach. "She said yes?" "Of course she said yes. She's been planning this for months, Roland. The whole thing has been one long audition, and she finally got the part." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked parking lot. 25 years of marriage, and my wife was engaged to someone else before we'd even discussed divorce. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Giselle is my friend, and she's about to make the biggest mistake of her life. And because—" She trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging. "Because what?" "Because Cornelius has been through this before. 3 times, actually. He finds women who are looking for security, promises them the world, marries them, and then controls every aspect of their lives until they can't leave." I turned around to face her. 3 times? His first wife, the one who passed away from cancer. She tried to leave him twice. Both times, he used his money and connections to make her life impossible. She only stayed because she was too sick to fight by the end. And the other 2? Never made it to the altar. But both of them left town afterward, and both of them signed agreements that prevent them from talking about their relationships with him. The picture Marissa was painting was uglier than anything I'd imagined. Cornelius wasn't just a lonely old man looking for companionship. He was a predator who used his wealth to trap women in situations they couldn't escape. Giselle doesn't know any of this? She sees what he wants her to see. The mansion, the cars, the jewelry. She thinks she's going to be a queen, but she's really going to be a prisoner. I sat back down, my mind racing. This changed everything. What had started as a simple case of adultery was actually something much more dangerous. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked. "I want you to stop her. I want you to make her see what she's getting into before it's too late." "And why would she listen to me? I'm just her boring husband, remember?" Marissa flinched. She never should have said that, and she never should have done any of this. But Roland, despite everything that's happened, I think she still loves you. She's just lost sight of what's important. Love. The word tasted bitter. If she loved me, she wouldn't be planning to marry someone else. People do stupid things when they're scared of getting old, of missing out on something better. It doesn't mean the love isn't still there. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still wanted to fight for my marriage, to find a way to bring Giselle home and pretend none of this had ever happened. But a larger part of me was thinking about something else entirely. "When's the wedding?" I asked. "Soon. Cornelius wants it done quickly before anyone has time to ask too many questions." "How soon?" "Next week. They're planning a small ceremony at the mansion, just immediate family and close friends." "Next week." That didn't give me much time to work with. After Marissa left, I called Lila and filled her in on what I'd learned. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disgust. "So our local Prince Charming is actually a controlling sociopath with money problems," she said when I finished. "That's actually perfect." "Perfect how?" "Because it gives us leverage, Roland. Multiple kinds of leverage." "I'm listening." "Giselle thinks she's marrying into wealth and security. What if she found out she was actually marrying into debt and control? And what if that information came to light in the most public, embarrassing way possible?" I could hear the gears turning in Lila's mind, the same calculating intelligence that had helped me survive high school and navigate the early years of my marriage. "What did you have in mind?" "Leave that to me, but I'm going to need a few days, and I'm going to need you to keep Cornelius distracted." "Distracted how?" "I don't know. Use your imagination. Just make sure he's too busy dealing with you to notice what I'm doing." That evening, I drove past the Whitmore mansion and parked across the street. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree, every window glowing with warm yellow light. I could see figures moving around inside, and occasionally I caught glimpses of Giselle in her new role as lady of the manor. She looked happy, radiant even. Whatever doubts she might have had about leaving me seemed to have evaporated in the face of Cornelius's wealth and attention. My phone buzzed with another message from my mysterious informant. "Garage. Tomorrow night. 2 a.m. Come alone." I typed back, "What's in the garage?" His real treasure. The thing he values more than money. Which is? His reputation. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions of running the shop, but my mind was elsewhere, planning and plotting and trying to figure out what I was going to find in Cornelius's garage. At 1:30 a.m., I drove to Hill Street and parked 3 blocks away from the mansion. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes in the small hours of the morning when even the insomniacs have finally surrendered to sleep. The Whitmore estate was surrounded by a stone wall topped with decorative iron spikes, but the wall was more for show than security. I found a section where a large oak tree had grown close enough to provide cover, and I managed to climb over without too much difficulty. The grounds were extensive, with winding paths that led through gardens and around a small pond. Security lights were positioned at strategic intervals, but they were motion-activated and easy to avoid if you moved carefully. The garage was a separate building behind the main house, designed to look like a small carriage house from the outside. But when I peered through one of the windows, I could see it was a car collector's paradise. 3 vintage automobiles sat under custom covers, a 1965 Mustang, a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, and what looked like a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda. All of them were in pristine condition, probably worth more than most people's houses. But it was the fourth car that caught my attention. The 1963 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud sat in the center of the garage like a mechanical throne, its chrome bumpers and silver paint job reflecting the overhead lights. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a symbol of everything Cornelius represented. I tried the garage door and found it unlocked. Small-town security, even in the wealthy neighborhoods. Inside, the garage smelled like leather and motor oil, and the kind of expensive car wax that costs more per ounce than most people spend on lunch. The Rolls-Royce dominated the space, its presence somehow both elegant and intimidating. I walked around the car slowly, admiring the craftsmanship despite myself. Whatever else Cornelius might be, he had excellent taste in automobiles. That's when I noticed the small refrigerator in the corner of the garage, the kind used to store beverages at parties or in man caves. On top of the refrigerator sat a tackle box and several fishing rods. Cornelius was apparently an angler, as well as a car collector. I opened the tackle box and found exactly what I was hoping for. Containers of fish bait, including several packages of the particularly pungent stuff used for catching catfish. The smell alone was enough to make my eyes water. Perfect. I spent the next 20 minutes carefully distributing the fish bait throughout the Rolls-Royce's interior, under the seats, in the air vents, inside the glove compartment, anywhere the smell would linger and be difficult to locate. For good measure, I also loosened the valve stems on all 4 tires, not enough to cause a blowout, but enough to ensure they'd be flat by morning. As a final touch, I used a can of spray paint I'd brought from the shop to write Gold Digger's Taxi across the driver's side door in bright red letters. It was juvenile, petty, and exactly the kind of thing that would drive a man like Cornelius absolutely crazy. I was almost finished when I heard voices coming from the direction of the main house. Through the garage window, I could see 2 figures walking along one of the garden paths, their conversation carrying clearly in the still night air. Giselle and Cornelius, taking what appeared to be a romantic midnight stroll. "Wedding will be perfect," Giselle was saying, "small and elegant just like you wanted." "Indeed," Cornelius replied, "though I do hope your husband won't cause any more scenes. His behavior at the country club was quite embarrassing. Roland's just hurt. He'll get over it eventually." "Will he?" "In my experience, men like your husband don't simply accept defeat gracefully. They tend to lash out in predictable ways." They were getting closer to the garage. I quickly finished what I was doing and looked for a way out that wouldn't involve walking directly past them. "What do you mean?" Giselle asked. "I mean that we should be prepared for him to do something desperate. Fortunately, men like Roland are usually more bark than bite." That stung more than I cared to admit. But it also confirmed what I already knew. Cornelius saw me as a minor inconvenience, nothing more than a speed bump on his road to happiness. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I managed to slip out the back of the garage and make my way to the wall without being seen. By the time I got back to my truck, I was grinning for the first time in weeks. Let Cornelius explain the state of his precious Rolls-Royce to his insurance company. Let him try to get the smell of rotting fish out of hand-stitched leather seats, and let him wonder what boring old Roland Farrow was planning to do next. My phone buzzed as I was driving home, a message from my mysterious ally. "Nice work, but that was just the opening act." I typed back, "What's next?" "Tomorrow you're going to get a phone call. When you do, say yes." "Yes to what?" "You'll know when it happens." I went to bed that night feeling more satisfied than I had in months. For the first time since discovering Giselle's affair, I felt like I was the one controlling the situation instead of just reacting to it. Cornelius wanted to play games with other people's lives. Fine. But he was about to discover that some games have consequences he never saw coming, and some opponents are a lot more dangerous than they appear. The phone call came at 9:17 the next morning, just as I was opening the shop for another day of pretending my life wasn't falling apart. "Mr. Farrow? This is Esther Caldwell. I'm Mr. Whitmore's private nurse." The voice was crisp and professional, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. I remembered seeing her name in my research, but we'd never spoken. "What can I do for you, Ms. Caldwell? I was wondering if we could meet. There are some things about Mr. Whitmore's situation that I think you should know." The mysterious ally. It had to be. "When and where?" "There's a diner on Route 20 about 10 miles east of town. Mel's Place. Do you know it?" I knew it. Trucker's stop, good coffee, and far enough from Millbrook that we wouldn't be seen by anyone who mattered. "I can be there in 30 minutes. I'll be in the back booth wearing a blue cardigan," leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what I was about to walk into. Mel's Place looked exactly like what it was, a roadside diner that had been serving coffee and pie to travelers for 40 years without changing much beyond the prices. The parking lot was half full of 18-wheelers and pickup trucks, and the smell of bacon grease hung in the air like a promise. Esther Caldwell was exactly where she'd said she'd be, sitting in the last booth with her back to the wall and a clear view of the entire restaurant. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested someone who'd seen everything and wasn't easily surprised. "Mr. Farrow," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "Thank you for coming. You're the one who's been sending me information." It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. Among other things, yes. A waitress appeared with coffee and menus, giving us a few minutes to size each other up. Esther had intelligent eyes and calloused hands, the kind of person who worked for a living and didn't apologize for it. "How long have you worked for Cornelius?" I asked after the waitress left. 3 years, since right after his last heart attack." "Heart attack?" "The first of 3. The most recent one was 6 months ago. His cardiologist says he's living on borrowed time, but Cornelius refuses to slow down or change his lifestyle." This was news to me. Cornelius had seemed perfectly healthy at the country club, certainly healthy enough to be planning a wedding and a new marriage. "Does Giselle know about his condition?" "She knows he takes medication, but she doesn't know how serious it is. Cornelius has been very careful to hide the extent of his health problems." "Why?" Esther smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because sick old men don't attract young wives. Wealthy, vigorous older men do." The pieces were starting to come together. "You said there were things I should know." "Several things. First, Cornelius isn't nearly as wealthy as he pretends to be. His investments have been performing poorly for years, and he's been borrowing against his assets to maintain his lifestyle." This confirmed what Marissa had told me, but hearing it from someone inside Cornelius's household gave it more weight. "Second, he has no intention of sharing his remaining wealth with your wife, regardless of what he's promised her. His will leaves everything to medical research, with a small provision for household staff." "Everything?" "The house, the cars, the art collection, what's left of the investment portfolio. All of it goes to charity. Giselle will get a modest monthly allowance and the right to live in the house until she remarries or passes away." I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. "She doesn't know this either." "Of course not. Cornelius has led her to believe she'll inherit everything when he passes. It's part of how he controls his relationships." "And the third thing?" Esther was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision. When she looked up, her expression had hardened. "The third thing is that I've been taking care of Cornelius Whitmore for 3 years, watching him manipulate and control everyone around him. And I'm tired of it. He's a cruel man who uses his money to hurt people, and he deserves whatever happens to him." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that your wife is about to make a terrible mistake, and that Cornelius is about to get exactly what he's earned. The question is whether you want to be part of making that happen." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. All I saw was the quiet determination of someone who'd made a difficult decision and was prepared to live with the consequences. What did you have in mind? Esther reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Cornelius had another heart attack 2 nights ago, a mild one, but enough to require hospitalization. He's been hiding it from everyone, including your wife. How is that possible? I'm his nurse. I know how to manage his medications and monitor his condition. As far as anyone knows, he's been fighting a mild case of flu. She slid the envelope across the table. These are copies of his medical records, his financial statements, and his will. Everything your wife thinks she knows about her future husband is a lie. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. Medical reports showing severe coronary artery disease and a prognosis measured in months rather than years. Financial statements showing assets barely sufficient to cover existing debts, and a will that would leave Giselle with almost nothing. Why are you giving me this? Because Cornelius Whitmore has spent his entire life using money to control people, and it's time someone turned the tables on him. And because your wife deserves to know what she's really getting into. What about you? What do you get out of this? Esther smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. Cornelius changed his will last month. The new version includes a substantial bequest for loyal household staff. Apparently, 3 years of devoted service has earned me a place in his affections. How substantial? Substantial enough to make the risk worthwhile. I closed the envelope and leaned back in the booth, trying to process everything I'd learned. Giselle was about to marry a man who was both broke and seriously unwell, believing she was securing her financial future when she was actually signing up for a few months of playing nursemaid to a failing tyrant. When is he planning to tell her the truth? After the wedding, once she's legally bound to him and can't easily leave. And if she found out before the wedding? That would be unfortunate for Cornelius. We sat in silence for a few minutes, drinking coffee and watching truckers come and go. Finally, Esther spoke again. There's one more thing. Cornelius is planning something for tonight. A surprise for your wife. Something he thinks will cement their relationship and ensure she goes through with the wedding. What kind of surprise? He's having his lawyer draw up papers that will give her power of attorney over his medical decisions. He's going to present it as a romantic gesture, proof that he trusts her completely. But really, it's insurance. If his health deteriorates rapidly, he wants someone legally bound to him who will be motivated to keep him alive as long as possible. The cynicism was breathtaking. Even in planning his own potential incapacity, Cornelius was scheming to maintain control. The presentation is scheduled for 8 o'clock tonight in the library. Small gathering, just a few close friends and family members. Including? Your wife, obviously. His lawyer, Philip Graves, the mayor and his wife, a few others from their social circle. I thought about this for a moment. What would happen if someone interrupted this little ceremony with some unwelcome information? That would depend on how the information was presented, and by whom. Esther stood up and left money on the table for her coffee. I should get back. Cornelius will be wondering where I am. One last question, I said. What happens to you when this all comes out? I'll be fine. I have excellent references and a clean employment record. There are plenty of wealthy families who need experienced private nurses. She paused at the edge of the booth. Mr. Farrow? Whatever you decide to do with that information, I'd suggest you do it soon. Cornelius's health is more fragile than he's letting on. If you wait too long, the decision might be made for you. After she left, I sat in the diner for another hour, reading through the documents she'd given me and planning my next move. The medical records painted a picture of a man living on borrowed time, held together by medications and sheer stubborn will. The financial records showed debts that would consume most of his assets within the next few years. And the will was a masterpiece of manipulation. designed to give Giselle just enough to keep her trapped, but not enough to give her real independence. By the time I left Mel's place, I knew exactly what I was going to do. That evening, I dressed in my best suit and drove to Hill Street. The Whitmore mansion was ablaze with lights, and I could see cars parked in the circular driveway. Cornelius's surprise party was in full swing. I parked across the street and walked up to the front door like I belonged there. When the housekeeper answered, I smiled and handed her an envelope. "Delivery for Mr. Whitmore," I said. "I was told it was urgent." She looked confused but accepted the envelope and disappeared into the house. A few minutes later, Philip Graves appeared at the door, his face flushed with anger. "Mr. Farrow, what is the meaning of this?" "I think that's obvious. May I come in?" "Absolutely not. This is a private gathering." "I'm sure it is, but I think everyone inside would be very interested in the contents of that envelope." Graves glanced back toward the interior of the house, where I could hear the sound of conversation and laughter. "What do you want?" "I want to give my wife a wedding present, information she's going to need for her new marriage." "This is harassment. This is public service." Before Graves could respond, Cornelius himself appeared in the doorway. He looked older than he had at the country club, his face pale and drawn despite his expensive suit. "Roland," he said. "How unexpected." "Hello, Cornelius. Feeling better?" "I heard you've been under the weather." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or fear. "I'm fine, thank you. Though I'm afraid this isn't a good time for visitors." "Oh, I think it's a perfect time. In fact, I think your guests would be very interested in what I have to share." I could see Giselle through the open door, standing in the foyer in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my truck. She was holding a champagne glass and laughing at something the mayor's wife had said. She looked radiant, and completely unaware that her fairy tale was about to turn into a nightmare. "What do you want?" Cornelius asked quietly. "I want the truth to come out, all of it. Your health, your finances, your real intentions toward my wife." "You're bluffing. Am I?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of the documents Esther had given me. His face went white. "Where did you get those?" "Does it matter? The question is, do you want to explain them to your guests, or should I?" Cornelius looked back toward the library, where his carefully orchestrated evening was proceeding exactly as planned. Then he looked at me, and I could see him calculating odds and consequences. "What do you propose?" "I propose we go inside and have an honest conversation about what Giselle is really signing up for. Let her make an informed decision about her future. And if I refuse, then I'll make sure these documents find their way to the local newspaper, the bank where Marissa works, and every gossip in town. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Millbrook will know that the great Cornelius Whitmore is broke, terminally ill, and planning to trap my wife in a marriage that will benefit no one but him." The silence stretched between us for a long moment. Finally, Cornelius stepped aside. "After you," he said. The library was exactly what I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who'd probably been just as manipulative as their descendant. The guests were arranged in a semicircle around Cornelius's desk, champagne glasses in hand, waiting for the evening's entertainment to begin. Giselle saw me first, her face cycling through surprise, confusion, and anger in the space of a few seconds. "Roland, what are you doing here?" "I brought you a wedding present," I said, walking to the center of the room. "Information you're going to need for your new marriage." The conversation died as everyone turned to look at me. I could feel their curiosity and disapproval in equal measure, but I didn't care. This was my moment, and I was going to make it count. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice to address the entire room, "I'm sure you're all here to celebrate Giselle and Cornelius's engagement. It's a beautiful love story, isn't it? Wealthy older gentleman sweeps unhappy wife off her feet, promises her a life of luxury and security. Roland, stop, Giselle hissed. But here's the thing about fairy tales, I continued. They're usually too good to be true, and this one definitely is. I pulled out the manila envelope and began distributing copies of the documents to the startled guests. What you're looking at are Cornelius's medical records, financial statements, and will. I think you'll find them very enlightening. The room erupted in confused chatter as people began reading. I watched Giselle's face as she scanned the medical reports, saw the moment when she realized what she was looking at. Heart disease, I said helpfully. Severe coronary artery disease, to be specific. 3 heart attacks in the past 2 years, the most recent one just 2 nights ago. His cardiologist gives him 6 months, maybe less. Giselle looked up from the papers, her face pale. Is this true? Cornelius was standing by his desk, gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles were white. Roland, you have no right. And the financial records are even more interesting, I continued. Turns out our local Prince Charming is broke. Oh, he's got assets, but they're all leveraged to the hilt. The house, the cars, the art collection, it's all mortgaged or borrowed against. The mayor's wife gasped audibly. Cornelius, surely this isn't… But the real kicker, I said, pulling out the will, is this. Cornelius has been promising Giselle that she'll inherit his fortune when he passes. What he hasn't told her is that his will leaves everything to charity. She gets a small monthly allowance and the right to live in a house that will probably be sold to pay his debts. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the guests exchanging glances, processing what they'd learned, beginning to understand the scope of the deception. Giselle was staring at Cornelius with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something deeper and more devastating. Is it true? She asked quietly. Cornelius straightened his shoulders, trying to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of his evening. The situation is more complex than Roland is making it seem. Is it true? She repeated, her voice stronger now. Giselle, my dear, you must understand. She threw her champagne glass at the wall behind his head, the crystal shattering with a sound like a gunshot. Is it true? The admission, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. Yes. The room exploded. Guests began talking all at once, their voices rising as they processed the scandal unfolding in front of them. The mayor was already heading for the door, probably calculating how this would affect his own reputation. Philip Graves was gathering papers, his face grim with professional damage control. But I only had eyes for Giselle. She was standing in the center of the chaos, still holding the medical reports, her cream-colored dress making her look like a ghost. When she looked at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: recognition. Not of my face, but of who I really was beneath all the boredom and routine. You did this, she said. I did. Why? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 25 years of marriage, months of betrayal, and the wreckage of 2 lives that had somehow become entangled in a gravely ill man's delusions. It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation, a plea, and a reckoning all at once, heavy with everything we hadn't said to each other over the past year. The room felt too small for it, the silence stretched tight as a wire pulled to its limit. Because you deserve to know the truth, I said finally. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. And because some games have consequences. I meant every word, not just for Cornelius, but for all of us who had let ourselves believe his stories, his promises, his carefully staged illusions. She nodded slowly, absorbing that, then walked past me toward the door. Her posture was rigid, like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at Cornelius, who was slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon, all the arrogance drained out of him now that the performance was over. I hope it was worth it, she said. All of it. There was no anger in her voice anymore, just exhaustion and quiet disappointment. Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of shocked guests and one very exposed manipulator. Conversations hadn't resumed. No one quite knew what to say or where to look. The illusion of elegance and control had shattered too completely for that. I followed her out into the night, catching up with her halfway down the driveway. Cool air hit my face, sharp and grounding after the suffocating atmosphere inside. She was walking fast, her heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown timer, each step putting more distance between us and everything that had just exploded behind those walls. Giselle. She stopped, but didn't turn around. Her shoulders lifted slightly, then settled. What do you want, Roland? Congratulations. An apology? Her voice was brittle, stretched thin by too many emotions colliding at once. I want to know what happens now. It was the only honest question I had left. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh people make when they're standing in the ruins of something they once believed in. Now I figure out how to rebuild a life I just finished destroying. You could come home. The words were out before I'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, they felt strangely right. Could I? After everything that's happened, everything I've done? She finally turned slightly, just enough for me to hear the doubt underneath the defiance. I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was that I didn't know. Too much had been said, too much damage had been done, and trust doesn't reassemble itself just because you want it to. But maybe certainty wasn't required to take the next step. We could try, I said. It wasn't a promise. It was an opening. She turned around then, and I could see tears on her cheeks, catching the light from the driveway lamps. Why would you want that? After what I put you through? The question wasn't defensive. It was vulnerable. Because 25 years should count for something. And because maybe we both learned something from this mess. I held her gaze, not looking away this time. What did you learn? That boring isn't the worst thing you can be, and that sometimes the person you think you know best is the one who can surprise you the most, including myself. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. It was small, uncertain, but real. You certainly surprised me tonight. Good. We stood there in the driveway of Cornelius Whitmore's mansion, two middle-aged people who'd just blown up their lives and weren't sure what came next. The night had settled around us, quiet and cool. Behind us, I could hear the sound of guests leaving, cars starting, doors closing, the party dissolving into gossip and speculation as quickly as it had once formed. Roland? Yeah? Thank you. For stopping me before I made the biggest mistake of my life. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. You're welcome. It felt like the simplest, truest answer I could give. She started walking again, and this time I walked with her. Our pace matched without discussion, side by side but not touching. We didn't talk about where we were going or what would happen tomorrow. There would be time for that later. Hard conversations, cautious steps, maybe even setbacks. For now, it was enough to move forward. We just walked through the quiet streets of Millbrook, past houses where other people were living other lives, making other mistakes, finding other ways to surprise themselves. Lights glowed softly behind curtains, unaware of the collapse and rebirth happening just a few streets away. Behind us, the Whitmore mansion stood dark and empty, its secrets finally exposed to the light. And somewhere in that darkness, Cornelius Whitmore was learning that some people can't be bought, some games can't be won, and some opponents are far more dangerous than they appear. The last laugh, it turned out, belonged to the boring husband after all.